Hey, what you reading for?
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about books, literary, horror, classics, and contemporary. I recently read a book that is so strange and so enjoyable as well. I have to tell you about it. In fact, there are two super strange books I want to tell you about today. One is kind of literary-ish, one kind of horror-ish. If you're new to this channel, thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoy the content, and I hope you consider subscribing. It is the only way that this channel can continue to grow, and it does keep me motivated to keep putting out content, and I do appreciate the support. The first book I want to talk about today is Ancient Lights by Davis Grubb from 1982, which admittedly doesn't have a particularly compelling cover, nor does it have a cover that I think accurately reflects the content of the book. But it is most assuredly a unique and compelling read, if not a very strange read at the least. Davis Grubb is a writer whose first book came out in 1957, and Ancient Lights was his last book. I think he's best known for his first book, Night of the Hunter, which was made into a successful movie, arguably a classic. I don't know, I haven't seen it. The way I came upon this book is that I am currently doing a 10-part video retrospective on horror from the 1980s, where I go year to year. I pick out 3 titles that look compelling, and then I read them with fresh eyes and give my opinions. And so Ancient Lights came up in my research for this project, even though Ancient Lights is not at all a horror book, not by any stretch of the imagination. But Davis Grubb is perhaps best known for his horror books like Night of the Hunter. So when a horror author comes out with a new book, regardless of the genre, it frequently gets categorized as horror. This happens quite often. It's quite annoying, as if a horror writer can't explore other genres, right? In any case, I was compelled to read Ancient Lights because, well, firstly, the name Davis Grubb, I was familiar with the name because of Night of the Hunter. And I had never read him before, and I figured he's an author that I should probably be familiar with. Also, because Ancient Lights was his last book, he was dying when he wrote it. And I was curious to see what a successful author, what he would choose to create with his final efforts. That adds an interesting dynamic to the creation. What is the final thing he has to say that even though he's dying, he knows he's dying, but he just has to get it out there. So I was curious to find out what that was. The first thing that struck me about Ancient Lights is its ambition. Davis Grubb set out, I think, to create an important work, and at the same time a very frivolous one, which mirrors the message of the book in that frivolousness or frivolity is what is important in life. What is the meaning of life? Love and silliness, apparently. Ancient Lights is a book that is spiritual, philosophical, hypersexual, and silly. And I think it manages beautifully to marry all these different tones, which we might think are conflicting. Spirituality, sex, and silliness are conflicting, but actually this book makes the case that they are intricately related. As for what genre it is, that is difficult to say. It is written in 1982, but the story takes place in 1992. So I suppose that there is an aspect of science fiction to it. It's set in the near future where the world is governed by an authoritarian dictatorial government that is set on suppressing thought and creativity. So there is this kind of science fiction element to it, but it's more of a zany science fiction, if that's a thing. It gave me the experience that is like reading a cartoon. Usually, if I say that a book is like reading a cartoon, I'm thinking of books like the 14-Carat Car or Dr. Identity. And usually when I say this, I don't mean it in a positive way. But this book, Ancient Lights, I really liked it. So while it did have an aspect of it's zany and fast-paced and magical, and it's a little bit like reading a cartoon, I did thoroughly enjoy it. There are elements of fantasy or magical realism because there are fairies, there are people with special gifts and magical jewels. Think Salman Rushdie meets Anthony Burgess and they overdose on Spanish fly while praying. Or think C.S. Lewis meets the Looney Tunes and they go to a sex club to discuss philosophy. I don't know how to describe this book. At best, I give you an example. I'll read a short extract. This passage is from the opening chapter where our protagonist, whose name is Fifi, she's a young woman of 26 years. And she is the daughter of a Christ figure father. And she has just undergone a freckle transplant. Where she takes the freckle from one of her lovers and has it transplanted to her inner thigh next to her sex, where her lover, whose name is Dorcas, she says, and I quote, "The silly mark you love beside my mouth," she whispered into my bangs. "Fifi, I want it always to live where my mouth was so happy." So Fifi has just undergone this freckle transplant, and then she tells us how enjoyable it is to have sex with fairies. There's a lot of sex with fairies in this book. There's a lot of sex, period. But it's not an erotic book. The aim is not to titillate, but rather to celebrate. Celebrate all the very human needs and human desires. So it's not an erotic book, but it is hypersexual. So in this extract, she's telling us how and why to have sex with fairies. Now and again, the little sprite will seize a wispy strand of pubic hair and swing both legs and torso deep into the vagina and begin gently wiggling his toes. Oh, sweet Christy, master of all love. There is a word in the fairy language for such a coming, but there is no human tongue can shape it. As a mortal woman, 26 years old and above average in sexual capacities, I speak of that human rarity, sex with a fairy, with temerity and reverence. There is nothing like it in the range of mortal sex acts. One is never quite the same after it is over. And let it be said, without the stigma of carrying tales, that I was quite thoroughly fucked by a fairy in the labyrinth at Echo Point last moonlit night. And, much as a wandering hillbilly guitar player stole my driver's license and credit cards from a motel dresser doily last month in Steubenville, so I suspected on this morning that the little lover of the night before had stolen Dorcas' freckle. I search misty-eyed with fear through the tremulous morning light. I sigh. My hips and legs slump down. I have seen the dear freckle. It is safe. Oh, Dorcas, I simply would have died if he had stolen it. So what is Ancient Lights about? What is it not about, right? It's hard to describe the plot without giving away the story. We go with Fifi on one mission or one quest after another, and these missions usually involve her having to save her sister or her father or save the world. And since this is set in the near future under a dictatorial, authoritarian government that tries to suppress thought and creativity, and this government is based on an unholy marriage of religion and commerce. And Fifi's father has written a book that will let love shine in everyone. So efforts are made to publish the book, to not publish the book, to subvert it, to suppress it, to steal it, to rewrite it. Ultimately, the Ancient Lights is not about this book. It's about the celebration of life, and by celebration we mean love and silliness. And farts are important too, on a spiritual and philosophical level. Let me read you one more extract. This is this is from a scene where the characters are at a sex club, and the hostess of the sex club has just farted, and one of the patrons throws her a dirty look. And so the hostess, she then rebukes the patron and goes off on a monologue as to the spirituality of a fart. She closed her great patchwork eyes and smiled, reflecting. A fart is the wandering ghost of good food, lovingly prepared and tastefully served. A fart is the banquet banquo. It is the poltergeist which haunts the fanciest of lace panties, even yours, my dear. The belch is officious and somehow utterly Turkish in its insolence. I never belch. The fart, on the other hand, is a soliloquy upon the good life, a gaseous apostrophe to joy, a cheeky riposte to death itself. It is a leveler of all, like death. It makes instant friends out of stuffy, uneasy travelers. It breaks the ice between young lovers, perhaps being considerable as a small golden bugle rallying the way to the adjacent forested field of honor. The king farts, though I suspect preachers seldom do, wanting to hoard the gases for their exhortations. A child's shy fart in church is often enough to restore humanness to these proceedings, having a far sweeter smell than that of piety. The peasant farts in pleasant fluttering flatulence by his country hearth, the rich man in his air-conditioned rolls. Old couples in featherbeds often discourse in farts, each little pop or whine or quack reminding them, like phrases of music by some trouvère, of the glories of the past, when the nearby playgrounds were ringing with joy and children. The French say of a stuffy woman, which you are, I fear, my darling, elle pète plus haut que son cul. And this is fair and just, for indeed some do, as the proverb avers, try to fart higher than their behinds, and the behinds of other people. The fart is in fact one of the greatest of natural lyric art forms. It provides the unwitty diner with a suitable rejoinder when he has been told he must foot the dinner check. It can be an ode by Pindar, or it can be Homeric. It makes of the body's humblest and second most maligned aperture a troubadour. I say, why this onus on the anus? In short, the fart transforms an orifice into an oracle, the asshole into asphodel. So saying, she shifted slightly on the geranium upholstery and farted again. What I loved about this book was its ambition. Davis Grubb, with his final moments on Earth, his final efforts, he sets out to create something that is unique and to mark his and define his individuality. I love the protagonist, Fifi, who exudes love and kindness and forgiveness. I love the way it's written. There are beautiful passages. It's clever, it's witty, it's funny. I love the message of the book. I love that it was able to give a message about spirituality, philosophy, and life and sex. And it was able to give this message without ever coming across as preachy or pedantic. Truly impressive on many levels. I will say that there were times while I was reading it that I was frustrated because we go on one mission and then the mission is finished and we realize that the mission was not really that important ultimately, so then we're off on another mission. So at times, especially early on, I was quite frustrated. I was like, what is this story about? Let's get on with it, right? But ultimately the writing is so well written, it's clever and witty, and I stuck with it, and at the end of the read I was left well satisfied. I've pulled a few reviews of Ancient Lights to give you an idea of what other readers think of this. Grubb's use of foreshadowing is illusionary. What he leads you to believe will happen does not. The next twist is totally unforeseen, even given the personalities of the characters. Those surprises are exactly like life and makes the book a masterpiece of writing. You will want to read it more than once. 5 stars. Another review. You are not prepared for this book. No matter what you have heard, no matter what you have read by Davis Grubb or what you imagine this book is, you cannot really know without reading it. I have read all his books. None of them truly foreshadow this one in scope, style, or subject. Perhaps that is because in Ancient Lights, Grubbs did not try living up to past glories. He broke new ground. Since there is nothing else like Ancient Lights, it cannot really come with a recommendation. It's far too bizarre for me to tell other people they will like it. But as for me, I loved it. 4 stars. And lastly, at this point, I'm no longer certain how many times I've read this generous, messy, lovely book, but I'm sure this won't be my last time through it. All I can say is thanks to the late, great Davis Grubb. 5 stars. It's high praise, huh? But I think it makes sense, you know. And unfortunately, those were the only reviews I was able to find. Only those 3 reviews. I'm sad. I definitely think that Ancient Lights, as strange as it is definitely worth checking out. It was my first Davis Grubb experience, but I definitely want to read more from him. I'm going to go back and read his first book, Knights of the Hunter. And then, if all goes well, I'll just go through his entire catalog because he's clearly an author with something to say and he knows how to say it. Next up is another very strange book, but strange for very different reasons. And that book is Dearest by Peter Loughran from 1984. I suppose we could call Dearest a horror book, although it's not scary and there are no supernatural elements to it. It is the first-person account of a man. He's a taxi driver in England, and he has done horrific things to his wife and gruesome things to his wife's corpse. I'm not sure what the author's intent was with this book, but I found it hilarious. The narrator, he has this very narrow worldview that is based on kind of over-the-top British working-class common sense, where there is no subtlety. It's a world of absolutes where everything is always this way and it's never this other way. And At first I thought it would be difficult to maintain this tone throughout the book, but I thought it was very effective and it held my interest throughout. And I thought it was very funny. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about by exaggerated British working class common sense, I'll read a short extract, and this is from the opening chapter where the narrator tells us about the sort of woman he likes. You might not think that's too bad, a woman having fancy nails, but just think what it means to the bloke who's got to live with her. If a woman spends hours every day doing her nails, it means she's not doing anything else. She's not homemaking, knitting, sewing, cooking, baking pies, anything at all. She's just sitting, scraping at her nails, or putting polish on them, or waving them around in the air to dry them, or mending chips in them, or taking the polish off again, or pushing back her cuticles. You get the scene. If you live with a fancy nails woman, the rest of the house is barren. She won't do anything because she's too busy with her nails, or she's scared of damaging them. So you live with unmade beds, unclean baths, unwashed dishes. You live out of tins and on packaged TV dinners and slimming foods you mix with skimmed milk. You live in a domestic desert. All the love and all the tenderness and all the effort that a good woman puts into the home goes into your bird's bloody fingertips instead. That's okay if all you want is a whore, but if you want a woman and a home, don't ever pick up with a bird who has fancy fingernails. Think Edgar Allan Poe meets Only Fools and Horses, or whatever British working class comedy sitcom. Those used to be very popular. Only Fools and Horses is the only one I can think of at this time. I wasn't able to find out much about this author, except that he's from Liverpool and he's of Irish descent. He wrote 3 books. Dearest was his second. His first book was called The Train Ride, the story of a man with a one-way ticket. And this book was translated into French called London Express. And it enjoyed quite a bit of success in France. And so most of what I found about this author were from French sites about this book. There's so little about him that I am led to believe, and I am not the only one, but I am led to believe that Peter Loughran is a pseudonym for a more famous author who wanted to distance himself from the tone that he chose in the hyper-violence that he chose in these 3 books. But that's just a guess. I think it's strange that I can't find anything about, or find very little about this author, and that he only created 3 books, which seems not a lot for an author to create. He did create an edition of Dearest that came out a year later called Jackie, which has apparently an additional chapter, but that edition or that book is quite difficult to find. In any event, I don't know much about this writer. I don't know what his intent was. I don't know if Dearest was meant to be funny. Was I supposed to laugh as much as I did? I don't know. I kind of think that he was trying to be funny because he's so consistent with his tone. But then again, I don't know. It's a very strange book. And I have a very strange sense of humor. I did find a few reviews of Dearest, and the reviews are positive, are all positive. Although none of the reviews mentioned how funny the book is, which has me worried a little bit. But I'll share some extracts from the reviews. Bone chilling, told from the first-person perspective of an unnamed cab driver with definite ideas about women and sex and religion and sociology and etc., etc. Dearest is the brutal and unflinching deep dive into the psyche of a character who isn't ever meant to be likable, though the reader might find him frighteningly sympathetic at times. Therein lies the true horror of this one. Yeah, so I definitely did not like the narrator. He's a disturbed man, and he doesn't treat women very well. But he has a funny way of narrating his story. Sorry. Another extract. An unexpected treat. Told first person by a regular yet unnamed British bloke who works as a taxi driver. Dearest doesn't feature an unreliable narrator so much as one so coolly rational in his beliefs that he is delusional, utterly insane. He dictates his thoughts and musings on women and sex and love and family in such obsessive detail, with such working class common sense, you start to think maybe he's right about it all. But what he's really doing is laying bare the worst of the male psyche. Okay, never did I think he was right about anything, but I get the point. He's consistent in his logic. And finally, I actually thought that this story was told from a rather unique perspective. Yeah, that's for sure. And I don't believe that I have read anything else quite like it before. The character of the taxi driver wasn't ever meant to be a sympathetic character or even particularly likable. So using him as a narrator for this story was something that I found seriously disturbing. The perspective was definitely warped, but was also chillingly effective, at least in my opinion. I give this book an A. Okay. Should you read Dearest? I don't know. Let me share with you a short extract. This is a passage where the narrator explains why it's good to have kids.
Much better to have a house full of kids and be happy, even if you're running to the pawn shop with the bedclothes and you haven't got 2 pennies to jingle together like in the old days. What's the good of having a sports car and going on holidays to the Med? You see these guys with sports cars, they all turn them in for a wife and kids eventually, except the odd one or two, and they just look stupider and stupider as they get older, and they're still driving around in an MGB with the silk scarf around their wrinkled old neck and all their hair falling out. You wonder who they think they're kidding. And as for holidays in the Med, they're not all they're cracked up to be. It's usually too hot for one thing, and you get the face burned off of you. It's too hot to walk anywhere, and if you get in a car, it's like stepping into a baker's oven. You could burn your hands on the steering wheel. So you've got to spend your time in the hotel pool, along with about 1 million other people, all shrieking and splashing water around. Or you can try the sea. That's spooky as hell. Every time you go more than knee deep, you keep thinking of sharks and octopuses. And just at the end of the beach, there's someone's sewer outlet. It's bad enough when it's your own people's, but when it's Italian and Spanish, I go right off it. I don't even like garlic.
Dearest is quite dark. The narrator has definite ideas about women, and they are not positive ideas. So there is quite a bit of ugliness that goes along with that. But despite that, I found it thoroughly entertaining. It's certainly unique and strange in its tone. So there you have it. Ancient Lights by Davis Grubb and Dearest by Peter Loughran. 2 very strange books for very different reasons and gave me very different but enjoyable reading experiences. Have you had any experience with these books or with these authors? What are some of the strangest books that you've read? And what is your favorite British working class sitcom? And is Sex with Fairies as enjoyable as Davis Grubb depicts it to be? I always enjoy reading your feedback. And if you don't have any feedback, you can always stop by the comment section and say hi. I always love hearing from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.